Have you ever felt like your entire existence was just a supporting role in someone else's story? That's been my life for 28 years.
I'm Emma Collins, the backbone, the fixer, the silent force behind the illustrious Collins family.
Not that anyone would notice. Every family has its hierarchy, and in mine, the spotlight has always belonged to my brother David. Handsome, charming David with his perfect smile and calculated charisma. My parents built their world around him while I constructed the scaffolding that kept everything from collapsing. Emma, could you handle the foundation's quarterly reports? Emma, the Hendersons are coming for dinner. Make sure everything's perfect. Emma, David needs help with his presentation.
Always Emma.
Always serving.
Always invisible.
Do you know what invisibility feels like? It's not just being unseen, it's having your voice systematically reduced to a whisper until you forget the sound of it yourself. It's watching your ideas being dismissed, only to be celebrated when they come from someone else's mouth, usually David's. For years, I accepted this as my place in the world.
The loyal Daughter, the supportive sister, the silent architect of the Collins family success.
Standing behind my father during press conferences as he announced another business triumph. Comforting my mother during her charity galas when something wasn't perfect enough. Supporting David through his meteoric rise in the company, doing the work that earned him the accolades. I remember sitting at our family dinner table last Christmas, watching them toast to family success, while I silently calculated how many hours of my life had disappeared into making their dreams reality. My father raised his glass, his eyes passing over me as if I were part of the furniture, focusing instead on David. To the future of Collins Enterprises, he said, and to the son who will take it to new heights. The son.
Singular.
As if I didn't exist at all. That night, as everyone slept, I found myself in my father's study, not for any nefarious purpose, but to complete the quarterly projections he'd asked me to revise. That's when I found it. A folder, unmarked, wedged between his personal calendar and desk blotter. I wouldn't have noticed it except for the edge of paper jutting out, marked with a date from 5 years ago. I shouldn't have opened it. Good daughters don't snoop. Loyal employees don't question. But something in me, some tiny spark of self that hadn't yet been extinguished, made me pull it out. Inside were documents about the Westlake property, the development project that had put Collins Enterprises on the national map. The project that had earned David his first major promotion. But these weren't the triumphant press releases or the glowing environmental impact reports I'd helped prepare for public consumption. These were shadow reports, internal memos, and emails detailing toxic contamination levels that had been concealed, bribes paid to local officials, and manipulation of test results. My hands trembled as I read the names of families who had bought homes there, families now experiencing unusual cancer rates and birth defects. Families whose complaints had been systematically buried by Collins' legal teams I had helped coordinate. I remember the wave of nausea that hit me when I recognized my own handwriting on some of the documents. I had been taking notes in meetings, organizing files, all without understanding the true context. I had been complicit in my own ignorance. That night changed everything. It wasn't just the revelation about Westlake, but what it represented. The possibility that everything I believed about my family was carefully constructed fiction. That the values I thought we shared, integrity, honesty, community service, were merely a veneer covering something rotten at the core. I returned everything exactly as I'd found it, but I couldn't return to the person I had been. Something had awakened in me, a hunger for truth that wouldn't be satisfied with crumbs of approval thrown my way. In the weeks that followed, I began noticing things. The hushed phone calls my father would take in his study. The nervous glances between David and our company's financial officer. The way my mother would change the subject whenever certain business associates were mentioned. I started paying attention to the subtle shifts in room temperature when certain topics arose at dinner. I catalogued the defensive postures, the dismissive phrases, the artful redirection techniques they employed. I'd been trained to manage these social maneuvers for others. Now I was studying them as if my life depended on it. Because, in a way, it did. The more I observed, the more I realized how masterfully I'd been manipulated all my life. My sensitivities had been weaponized against me. My empathy used to delegate emotional labor, my thoroughness exploited for others' advancement, my loyalty leveraged to ensure my silence. Even David, whom I'd defended and supported through everything, began to appear in a different light. His late-night calls, his unexplained absences, the way he would glance at his phone whenever a particular number called. At first, I assumed it was just another of his conquests. David had never lacked female attention. But there was something different about this one.
So meeting more sekretive.
More significant. One night, after a particularly exhausting company event, David asked me to return to the office to retrieve some files he'd forgotten. Tired but obliging as always, I agreed. It was nearly midnight when I entered the darkened office building. As I approached the executive floor, I heard voices, hushed but intense. One was David's. The other belonged to Laura, my best friend since college and our company's marketing director. I stopped, not wanting to intrude on what seemed like a heated professional discussion. But then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of intimacy. The soft murmurs, the gentle laughter that follows private jokes, the shifting of bodies moving closer. I froze, unable to process what I was hearing.
Laura.
My Laura. The one person outside my family who I thought saw me. The friend who had held me through breakups, who knew my dreams and fears, who had been my confidant for over a decade. And David, my brother, who knew how much Laura's friendship meant to me. I didn't confront them. Not then. I silently retrieved the files from David's office and left without making my presence known. But something crystallized in me that night, a realization that perhaps I had never really known any of them.
Not my Vater. Not my Mutter.
Not David. Not even Laura. And most disturbingly, I wondered if I knew myself anymore. Who was I if not the loyal daughter, the supportive sister, the devoted friend? If those identities were built on deception, what remained beneath? I would soon find out that the answer was someone far more powerful than any of them had anticipated. Have you ever watched a magic trick being revealed? That moment when the illusion disintegrates, and you see the mechanisms behind the wonder? That's what my life became in the months that followed. A systematic dismantling of every illusion I'd accepted as truth. I didn't confront my family or Laura immediately. Instead, I became a detective in my own life, investigating the disparities between what I'd been told and what actually existed. I started small, with the Westlake documents I'd discovered. Using my position as the family organizer, I gained access to files, records, and communications that would normally be protected. No one questioned me. After all, I was just Emma, taking care of things as I always did. What I uncovered was staggering. The Westlake project wasn't an isolated incident. There was a pattern stretching back decades: environmental corners cut, regulations sidestepped, communities sacrificed on the altar of Colin's prosperity. My father hadn't built an empire on innovation and integrity as I'd been raised to believe. He'd built it on corruption, manipulation, and a stunning disregard for human consequences. Each discovery was like a physical blow. I remember sitting alone in my apartment, surrounded by printouts and notes, feeling as if I was mourning the death of my entire worldview. The family I thought I had, however flawed our relationships might be, had never existed at all. But the professional betrayals paled in comparison to the personal ones. As I dug deeper, I uncovered the truth about David and Laura's relationship. It wasn't a recent development or a casual affair. They had been together for nearly 2 years, conducting their relationship in secret, laughing behind my back. I found emails, hotel receipts, even a key to a shared apartment I never knew existed.
The worst part?
The timestamps on some of their messages. Messages sent while Laura was supposedly consoling me after my breakup with James. Messages exchanged during family dinners where they sat across from each other, playing the roles of my brother and my best friend, while beneath the table they were anything but.
I remember the night I confronted Laura.
Not with anger or accusations, but with innocent questions that I knew would force her to either tell the truth or compound the lie. We were at our favorite wine bar, the one where we'd celebrated promotions and mourned setbacks for years. You seem different lately, I said, watching her face carefully. Happier.
Is there someone new in your life?
I saw the calculation in her eyes, the momentary consideration of honesty, quickly replaced by practiced deception. Just busy with work, she said, forcing a laugh. "You know how it is. Speaking of which, how's the new project going?" In that moment, something hardened inside me. Something that had been softening and crumbling for weeks suddenly crystallized into resolve. She had her chance to come clean, to respect our friendship enough to be honest. Instead, she chose to continue the betrayal, to look me in the eyes and lie without hesitation. It was the same with David. When I casually mentioned seeing his car near an apartment building across town, he fabricated an elaborate story about meeting a potential client. The ease with which he lied to me, his sister, his supporter, his accomplice in success, confirmed what I was beginning to understand. In their eyes, I wasn't worthy of truth. I was a convenience, a tool, a stepping stone to what they really wanted. The revelation transformed my pain into something else entirely. Something cold and clear and powerful. If I had been seen as insignificant, then I would use that perception as my greatest weapon. If they thought me incapable of agency or consequence, they would learn how dangerous such underestimation could be. I began planning methodically. I wasn't interested in simple exposure or public humiliation. Those would be satisfying but fleeting. No, what I wanted was a reckoning. A complete dismantling of the false narratives they had constructed. I wanted truth in all its brutal, unforgiving glory. I started collecting evidence systematically. Financial records showing my father's corruption. Documentation of environmental violations that could trigger federal investigations. Proof of David's insider trading activities that had bolstered his meteoric rise. Evidence of company funds diverted to political bribes and personal luxuries. But I needed more than just corporate malfeasance. I needed leverage against those who had personally betrayed me. I hired a private investigator to document David and Laura's relationship. I gained access to their private communications, their secret meeting locations, their plans for a future that conveniently erased me from the picture. Most importantly, I began creating my own narrative, building relationships with journalists, establishing confidential communications with regulatory agencies, positioning myself as a whistleblower with insider knowledge. I was no longer the silent supporter. I was becoming the architect of their downfall. Throughout all of this, I maintained my role as the perfect daughter, the supportive sister, the loyal friend. I attended family dinners with a smile, helped David with presentations, met Laura for our regular coffee dates. I played my part flawlessly, all while dismantling their world piece by calculated piece. There were moments of doubt, of course. Late at night, alone with my thoughts and my growing archive of evidence, I sometimes questioned what I was becoming. Was I justified in my planned retribution, or was I transforming into something as corrupt as what I sought to destroy? Was this really about justice, or had I simply found a way to channel my lifetime of resentment into devastating action? These questions haunted me until the night I discovered the final betrayal. While organizing my father's files, always the dutiful daughter, I found documentation of my trust fund. The fund I'd been told was modest but secure, waiting for me to find my path.
The reality?
It had been systematically drained over years, diverted into David's more substantial accounts and my father's personal investments. My future had literally been stolen to enhance theirs. That night, alone in my apartment, I finally allowed myself to feel the full force of what had been done to me. Not just the financial theft, but the theft of autonomy, of recognition, of basic human dignity. I had been treated as an afterthought in my own life, a supporting character whose needs and futures were expendable.
For the first time in my adult life, Isobit Withut restreint.
I screamed into pillows, broke a vase against the wall, allowed myself the rage I'd always suppressed for the sake of family harmony. It wasn't pretty or dignified. It was raw and animal and necessary. When the storm passed, I felt something unexpected, clarity. If I had been invisible all these years, then invisibility would become my superpower. They would never see me coming until it was too late. The perfect daughter, the supportive sister, the loyal friend would become the agent of their destruction. I looked at myself in the mirror that night, tear-streaked and disheveled, and saw someone new emerging from the wreckage of who I'd been trained to be. Someone with edges and angles and a hardness I'd never allowed myself before. Someone capable of not just imagining retribution, but executing it with surgical precision. They made you, I whispered to my reflection. but they don't get to decide what you become. The next morning, I called an emergency family meeting. It was time to set my plan in motion. Time to show them exactly who Emma Collins really was. They arrived at the family estate expecting a crisis. Perhaps I had health issues or financial problems that required their immediate attention. That's who I was to them, after all, the one who needed help, never the one who offered consequences. My father settled into his usual seat at the head of the table, impatience already etched in the lines around his mouth. My mother perched beside him, perfectly coiffed even for this unexpected gathering. David arrived last, slightly disheveled, clearly annoyed at having his Saturday plans disrupted. I had specifically asked him not to bring Laura. That part of the reckoning would come later. "Well, Emma," my father began, checking his watch, "what's this emergency? Some of us have important commitments today." I smiled, not the accommodating smile they were used to, but something different. Something that made my mother shift uncomfortably in her seat. "I wanted to discuss the future of Collins Enterprises," I said calmly, placing a sealed envelope in front of each of them. David snorted. "Since when do you concern yourself with company matters beyond what we assign you?" "Open the envelopes," I said, ignoring his dismissal. They did, almost in unison. I watched their faces carefully, cataloging each micro-expression as they processed what they were seeing. Confusion. Disbelief.
The dawning horror of recognition.
My father was the first to recover. "Where did you get these?" he demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. "Does it matter?" I asked. "They're authentic. You know they are." Inside each envelope was a different piece of evidence. For my father, documentation of the Westlake cover-up with his signature on key directives. For my mother, proof of her knowledge and complicity in financial fraud through the foundation she supposedly ran for charitable purposes. For David, evidence of his insider trading activities, along with a particularly explicit email exchange with Laura discussing how they would handle me once they went public with their relationship. "If you think you can blackmail your own family," David began, his face flushed with anger. I cut him off. "Blackmail suggests I want something from you. I don't."
Not anymore.
"Then what is this?" my mother asked, her voice trembling slightly. "This is a courtesy notice," I said. "In 48 hours, this information, and much more, will be delivered to the FBI, the SEC, the EPA, and several investigative journalists who have expressed significant interest. I wanted you to know first, as a professional courtesy."
And perhaps as a final act of the family loyalty you've exploited all these years.
The silence that followed was absolute. I could almost hear the calculations happening behind their eyes, the desperate scramble for leverage, for escape routes, for some way to contain what I had set in motion. My father recovered first, his businessman's instincts kicking in. "Emma, clearly you're upset about something. Whatever you think you've discovered has been taken out of context. Let's discuss this rationally, as a family." "As a family," I repeated, tasting the irony of the words. "When have we ever been a family? When have I ever been anything more than a resource to be used and discarded?" "That's not fair," my mother interjected, tears gathering in her perfectly made-up eyes. "We've given you everything." "Have you?" I asked quietly. "Then perhaps you can explain why my trust fund, the one you claimed was being carefully managed for my future, has been systematically drained to finance David's ventures and Dad's personal investments?" Their stunned expressions confirmed what I already knew. They never expected me to discover this particular betrayal. They had become so accustomed to my acquiescence that the possibility of me investigating my own finances had never occurred to them. "There have been temporary reallocations," my father started, slipping into his crisis management tone. "For tax purposes only. Everything will be restored with interest." "When?" I asked. "After I've spent my entire life serving as this family's unpaid assistant? After I've sacrificed every personal ambition to maintain the Collins illusion of perfection?" David slammed his hand on the table. "This is ridiculous. You've always been financially supported. You've always had a position in the company." "A position?" I laughed, surprising even myself with the bitter sound. You mean the role of making you look competent? Of doing the work you take credit for? Of managing the details you consider beneath you? I turned to my father. Did you know David hasn't actually completed a quarterly projection in 3 years? I've done them all. He forwards them to you with his name after I've spent nights perfecting the numbers. The flash of surprise on my father's face was momentarily satisfying, but David's reaction was even better. A mixture of panic and fury that confirmed every word. And let's discuss Laura, I continued, turning back to my brother. 2 years, David. 2 years of lying to my face, both of you pretending nothing had changed while planning your future together. That's personal, David hissed. It has nothing to do with the company. It has everything to do with character, I countered. With integrity. With basic human decency. All the values this family claims to uphold while systematically violating them in every possible way. No, I said quietly. You're people who share my DNA. You stopped being my family the moment you decided I was expendable. What followed was predictable: threats, pleading, attempts at manipulation. My father offered money, a genuine role in the company, public recognition of my contributions. David vacillated between rage and desperate bargaining, even suggesting he would break things off with Laura if that's what I wanted. I listened to it all with a strange detachment, as if observing a scene in a play I'd watched too many times before. Their offerings, things that would have meant everything to me once, now seemed hollow and meaningless. I didn't want their grudging recognition or belated inclusion.
I wanted Tod. I wanted Justice.
I wanted them to face the consequences of their actions, just once in their privileged lives. It's too late, I said finally, standing to leave. The documents have already been duplicated and secured. Even if something happens to me, they'll still be released.
The triad implicit in my Würzung in the Erbetwehen US.
For the first time, I saw fear in my father's eyes, not just for his reputation or fortune, but perhaps for something more fundamental. Had he finally recognized me as someone capable of consequential action? Someone whose hatred he should have avoided cultivating? You'll destroy yourself too, he said quietly. The Collins name will be ruined.
Your future.
My future was stolen long ago, I interrupted. I'm simply taking it back.
I walked out of that house for the final time, leaving chaos in my wake.
The next 48 hours passed in a blur of desperate phone calls and messages that I didn't answer. My father's lawyers reached out. My mother appeared at my apartment, begging for reconciliation. David alternated between threats and teary apologies. Laura came too, her eyes red from crying, swearing she had planned to tell me about her relationship with David, that she had never meant to hurt me. I listened in silence, noting how even in her apology, she centered herself. Her intentions, her guilt, her needs. Not once did she acknowledge the profound violation of trust, the years of active deception, the countless moments when she could have chosen honesty but deliberately chose betrayal instead. I hope he was worth it, I said finally. Because when this is over, you'll only have each other. And from what I've gathered, David isn't particularly loyal when things get difficult. The hurt in her eyes should have given me satisfaction. Instead, I felt nothing. The Emma who had loved Laura, who would have forgiven anything to preserve their friendship, no longer existed. In her place stood someone harder, clearer, unburdened by the weight of misplaced loyalty. When the 48 hours elapsed, I kept my promise. The evidence was released simultaneously to multiple authorities and media outlets. The Collins empire began to crumble within hours. Stock prices plummeted. Regulatory agencies launched investigations. Former employees came forward with additional testimony, sensing the shift in power dynamics. I watched it unfold from the quiet of my new apartment in another city, my phone turned off, my future finally my own. The media tried to find me, of course. The whistleblower daughter made for a sensational story, but I had disappeared effectively. The skills I had honed managing my family's secrets now served me in creating my own privacy. People often ask if I regret what I did. If the destruction of my family's empire and reputation weighs on my conscience. They expect guilt, remorse, perhaps even a desire for reconciliation. What they don't understand is that true liberation comes with clarity, not confusion. I didn't destroy my family. I exposed the truth they had hidden for decades. I didn't ruin lives. I simply removed the protective shroud of privilege that had insulated them from consequences. And in doing so, I reclaimed my own life from their shadow.
Some call it revenge. I call it justice.
Not just for me, but for every family sickened by the Westlake contamination. For every investor defrauded by my father's manipulations. For every person who had been used and discarded by the Collins machinery of success. The process transformed me. The invisible daughter became visible in the most consequential way possible. The woman they had underestimated became the architect of their downfall. The voice they had silenced became the testimony that couldn't be ignored. But more importantly, I transformed myself. I shed the desperate need for their approval, the pathological loyalty that had kept me tethered to people who never deserved my devotion. I discovered strengths I never knew I possessed: resilience, strategic thinking, and a moral clarity that had somehow survived years of systematic gaslighting.
Today, I live a different life.
A quieter one, built on my own terms. I work with advocacy groups for corporate whistleblowers, helping others navigate the treacherous journey from silence to speech. I've written about my experience under a pseudonym, creating a roadmap for others trapped in systems of familial or professional abuse.